My uncle fired me to make room for his son, completely unaware that I was the company's majority shareholder. What happens next will leave you speechless. It happened on a Thursday, and I knew something was off the moment I walked into the office. The air felt still, like the calm right before a thunderstorm. The receptionist didn't greet me like she usually did. Her eyes flicked up, then down again, like she didn't want to see me. I adjusted my blazer, a navy blue one I reserved for board meetings, and headed down the hallway lined with glass offices and fake smiles. The floor was too quiet. I could hear the click of my shoes like a countdown. My uncle's assistant, Jordan, gave me a strange nod as I approached the door. It wasn't pity. It was nervousness, like he knew what was coming but couldn't stop it. I gave a small knock, and Uncle Edward's voice came through, steady and clipped. "Come in." He didn't call me by name. I stepped in and shut the door gently behind me. His office smelled like cedarwood polish and old coffee. The blinds were half drawn, letting strips of sunlight fall across his desk in broken lines. Edward sat behind it, perfectly still, fingers steepled. He didn't rise, didn't smile. There was no warmth in his eyes, just calculation. "Aaron," he said, "have a seat." I obeyed, though my body already knew something wasn't right. I took the chair across from him, the leather creaking faintly beneath me. I was still holding a cup of bitter breakroom coffee, half full and growing cold. He cleared his throat. "This isn't easy, but I'll get to the point." His voice was low, rehearsed, as if he'd practiced it in front of a mirror. "I'm letting you go." Just like that. No build-up. No hesitation. The words dropped like lead. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I kept my eyes on the wooden bookshelf behind his shoulder. Rows of legal manuals and dusty trophies he never earned. My fingers tightened slightly around the coffee cup. "It's not personal," he continued. "We're restructuring, repositioning for long-term growth." I didn't speak, didn't give him the dignity of a reaction. My heartbeat didn't even speed up. I just waited, and sure enough, the truth came. "Isaac will be taking your place." There it was, his son, my cousin, the kid who showed up late to every meeting, who once fell asleep during a merger presentation. The one I covered for time and time again because blood was blood. I turned my eyes toward Edward then, just for a second, and I saw it, relief, like he'd gotten through the worst of it. He thought this conversation was done. "I understand," I said softly. My voice came out smooth, calm, surprised even me. He blinked. "You do." I nodded once. "Of course. Thank you for telling me directly." He leaned back, a bit more comfortable now. "It's nothing you did wrong, Aaron. You've been a real asset, truly. This is just business." He smiled like that made it better. Like calling it business erased the years we'd spent building this company side by side. Like it made the betrayal clean. "Of course," I repeated. "I'll gather my things." He stood as I did. We didn't shake hands. He said, "Thank you for understanding," like I'd done him a favor. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, the sound of my footsteps suddenly louder than before. The walk to my desk felt longer than usual. People moved around me like I didn't exist. No one made eye contact. The junior analysts I'd mentored looked away. The IT guy who once cried in my office after a divorce didn't even nod. Isaac stood near the conference room, holding a leather folder like it was a trophy. He grinned when he saw me, not cruelly, just carelessly, like someone who'd been handed a seat he didn't build. A prince stepping into a crown he didn't earn. "Hey," he said, like we were still boys playing soccer in the backyard.
"Sorry, man."
Just how things shook out. I didn't answer. I didn't trust myself to. I walked past him and opened my office door one last time. Inside, everything felt smaller. I pulled out a box from the cabinet and started placing my things inside. The framed picture of my parents, a brass pen my father gave me, a notebook with 10 years of strategies, sketches, and dreams. As I moved through the space, something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even heartbreak. It was something quieter, heavier, like ice settling into stone. I had given this company everything. and he had tossed me aside without a second thought. But he didn't know what I knew. 5 years ago, when things got rocky and 2 of our original investors wanted out, I bought their shares. Quietly, carefully, through a holding company I named after my mother's maiden name. I didn't announce it. I didn't use it to sway votes. I just held it, watched, waited, because I believed family meant something. I was wrong. He never asked who bought those shares. He never looked into it. Because to him, I was always the nephew, the orphan, the assistant in all but title. Useful, loyal, disposable. I sealed the box shut and walked down the corridor toward the elevator. The doors opened with a soft chime. I stepped in alone. As they closed, I looked back at the floor. Glass walls, empty eyes, a place I had helped build brick by brick. No one noticed me leaving. Outside, the sun was bright. A breeze moved through the parking lot like a whisper. I stood beside my car for a long moment, watching people come and go through the revolving door, watching Isaac step out and shake hands with a vendor like he belonged there. Like this was already his. But I wasn't broken. I was awake. That day, as I boxed up my things and walked out to the parking lot, I wasn't broken. I was awake. The first morning after I was fired, I made coffee the same way I always had, dark, black, no sugar. I sat at the small table by the window, listening to the world outside like it belonged to someone else. I didn't call anyone. I didn't check social media. I just stared at my reflection in the glass. I didn't feel rage, just weight. Like something heavy had settled in my chest overnight. Edward had cut me out like trimming dead branches. But I knew him too well. He didn't act without a safety net. If he'd pulled the trigger on me, he was holding something in the other hand. That thought stayed with me like a splinter. So I got to work. Not in an office, not with a team, but alone at my dining table with my laptop and a copy of the company's old back-end systems. I still had access to most of it. The removal had been swift, but not thorough. A mistake on their part. One they didn't even know they'd made. The deeper I looked, the more the threads began to tug loose. The internal operating agreement had been updated 3 months before. Edward had locked in full authority over hiring, restructuring, and executive decisions. That was the first red flag. The second came in the form of a transfer record. My team's biggest accounts, reassigned to Isaac's temporary group a week before I was let go. A full week. So this had been set in motion long before that coffee cup cooled in his office. I kept digging. In one folder, I found a performance memo addressed to the board. Concerns about Aaron's recent lack of initiative in innovation strategy. It read. My jaw tightened as I read the sentences. Prefers traditional models. Resistant to disruptive proposals. It was fiction, just enough truth to sound real. I remembered Edward asking me weeks earlier why I hadn't pushed the AI proposal harder. I said it needed more research. He smiled and said he agreed. But now I realized he was baiting me, laying groundwork. For days I worked in silence. I barely slept. I didn't even tell Darren, my best friend since college, or my fiancé Marcus, who kept asking if I was okay. I told him I was just restructuring my focus. It wasn't a lie. Every file I opened revealed more. Payments to unfamiliar consulting firms. Project budgets ballooning for no reason. Isaac's name appeared in approval fields, probably not even reading what he signed. He was being used and he didn't even know it. One night, I opened an email thread between Isaac and one of our oldest clients, Trenton Park. The language struck me. I'd written a pitch for them months ago before being cut off. It was supposed to be tabled. Edward said it wasn't the right time. But now, here was Isaac sending it word for word. Even the layout was identical. I found the timestamp draft in my own system. My ideas, my strategy, dressed in someone else's name. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not out of hurt, but clarity. They hadn't just replaced me. They had stolen me piece by piece. Edward had used my silence, my patience, and turned it into erasure. But he had forgotten the one thing I never gave away. Control. I opened another window and began documenting everything. Screenshots, downloads, printouts. I tagged and filed everything, dates, amounts, approvals. I used the audit software I'd helped design years ago, the one the new team likely hadn't even touched. It tracked internal changes. It revealed ghost edits. I found backdated memos and irregular logins. Someone had been altering records, making it look like Isaac had always been the driving force. It was sloppy, obvious if you knew what to look for. Every click, every folder gave me new pieces of the picture. And behind it all, one truth stood out like a crack in glass. This wasn't just Isaac's promotion. It was Edward's plan to remove me from the path entirely. Not just from the boardroom, but from history. And I started to remember things that, at the time, felt small. Like that Christmas when I was 15. Edward gave Isaac a brand new mountain bike. Red, shining, still wrapped in showroom plastic. He handed me a coat. The tag said, "Gently used." He smiled and said, "It's from my own closet. High quality." I remember nodding, not because I believed him, but because I didn't want to seem ungrateful. Or the summer I turned 22, and he sent Isaac with him to a conference in New York. I asked if I could come too. He said, "Next year, son. You're more valuable here, holding down the fort." That year, Isaac posted photos of rooftop parties, shaking hands with CEOs I'd only read about. I stayed behind, organizing inventory sheets no one would read. I used to think Edward just didn't want to play favorites. Now I knew he already had one. Still, none of that drove me to rage. I wasn't planning to storm into the office or make a scene. What I felt now wasn't fire. It was precision. I would dismantle this not with shouting but with facts. I'd strip away the illusions until only the truth remained. Over the next 3 weeks, I met quietly with former investors, using the holding company as a screen. I asked questions about recent changes. I took notes on board shifts. I spoke to analysts from outside firms who whispered concerns about rising costs and inconsistent leadership. All of it aligned. Edward had overplayed his hand. Then, one of the interns I had mentored, Justin, messaged me on LinkedIn. "Hey," he wrote, "not sure if you saw this, but Isaac pitched a project last week that looked familiar." He attached a transcript from a recent investor meeting. It was a proposal I had written 6 months ago, a risk management overhaul plan. The same one Edward called too ambitious. Word for word, it was mine. Isaac had stood in front of the board and claimed it as his own. The only thing changed was the header. That told me everything. Not only had they pushed me out, they were cannibalizing the work I left behind. I stared at the document with steady eyes, then slowly leaned back in my chair. This wasn't just about greed. It was legacy theft. A slow erasure of every trace I'd ever left on the company. And if I let it go, they'd succeed. But they didn't know I had the keys. I had ownership, real, documented, legal. And the time was coming when I'd use it. For now, I continued watching, listening, collecting. Every lie they told was another nail in the coffin they didn't know they were building. I wasn't rushing. I was sharpening. They hadn't just replaced me. They had stolen me in pieces. But I had something they didn't know, ownership. The boardroom was colder than I remembered. Not just the air conditioning, but the atmosphere, thin, sharp, full of fake confidence and hidden panic. I walked in right on time, wearing a gray suit, no tie. The fabric hugged my shoulders, the color quiet and unreadable. I carried no briefcase, just a leather folder tucked under one arm. I nodded at the board members seated around the table. Familiar faces that used to light up when I entered a room. Now they just blinked, lips tight, unsure of where I stood. But I didn't need a greeting. I already knew who I was. Edward sat at the head of the table, his fingers drumming the wood. He didn't speak as I entered. His jaw shifted slightly, the only sign he recognized the shift in temperature. His son, Isaac, sat to his right, legs crossed too casually, hair slicked back, trying to look like he belonged. When his eyes met mine, confusion crossed his face, but he masked it with a tight smirk. I didn't smirk back. I took the farthest seat, end of the table. No power position, no statement, just presence. I watched them run through the agenda. Edward cleared his throat and spoke with that same practiced ease he'd used for years. Q3 has shown modest progress, he began. His voice was steady, but I heard it. The drop of uncertainty. The hesitation under the numbers. One of the directors, Harold Ames, nodded with a slow frown. Modest is generous, he muttered, flipping through his report. Margins are shrinking. Edward smiled through it. We're investing long-term. The groundwork is being laid. Isaac chimed in, voice too fast. It's part of the innovation curve we predicted. He looked around the room, trying to catch nods. He caught none. I said nothing. Not yet. They continued with projections, graphs, buzzwords meant to cover what the numbers couldn't. Market realignment. Operational flexibility. Strategic pivots. But beneath the language it was clear. The company was slipping. And Edward, once sharp and decisive, now looked like a man spinning a plate that had already cracked. When the last line item ended and the meeting began to close, I spoke. Before we adjourn, I said, calm and even, I'd like to exercise my rights as the majority shareholder. The room froze. Chairs didn't creak. Phones stopped vibrating. It was like time paused. The air caught in every throat. Edward turned toward me slowly. His face paled, like the words didn't make sense. What are you talking about? He asked. Not angry, not confident, just confused. I opened the leather folder and slid a thick stack of papers down the polished table. The soft scrape of paper against wood was louder than any shout. Heads turned. Eyes narrowed. Ownership transfers, I said. Dated. Signed. Notarized. 5 years ago, I purchased the holdings of Renner and Keel through a third-party shell. I've held 51 of this company since then. Edward stared down at the papers, but didn't touch them. That's impossible. It's not, I replied gently. You just never bothered to check who bought them. You assumed no one would challenge your control. Isaac shifted in his chair. Why wouldn't you say anything? He asked, almost laughing. If you've had control all this time, I believed in respecting the family, in letting things grow naturally, I said. But that respect ended when I was fired under false pretenses and replaced by someone who wasn't ready. Edward finally stood. This is outrageous, he snapped, but his voice cracked at the edges. I didn't raise mine. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded. I've also conducted a full audit using archived back-end software, I continued. It reveals numerous policy violations, unapproved fund reallocations, direct plagiarism of intellectual property, contracts falsified to favor internal hires, all tied directly to Isaac's authorization codes, all initiated under your leadership. One of the older board members, Mr. Clarkson, frowned deeply. Is this true? Edward didn't answer. He looked at me. Really looked like for the first time he was seeing me not as a boy, not as an assistant, but as something else. A threat. No, a fact. Isaac's confidence broke first. I didn't know, none of that was me. I just signed the... You signed without reading, I said. Or you read and didn't care. Either way, the damage is yours. Harold leaned forward. What do you want, Aaron? An internal audit, full transparency, and a vote of no confidence. The silence was immediate, then broken only by Edward's voice, soft now. You'd really do this to me? I looked him in the eye. You did this to yourself. Clarkson spoke first. I vote yes. Then came Harold. Yes. One by one, the hands raised. No one defended Edward. Not even Isaac. It's unanimous, said Clarkson, tapping his pen on the table. Edward's tenure is terminated effective immediately. I turned toward Isaac. You can step down voluntarily, or I'll file for breach of conduct. His lips parted like he wanted to argue, but all that came out was a breath. I'll step down, he said. I nodded once. I reached into my folder again and pulled out 2 envelopes. I slid them down the table. Severance packages. Clean. Fair. You'll both retain your shares. You're free to pursue other opportunities. Edward didn't touch the envelope. He just stared at me, not with hate, not even with regret, just disbelief, like the world had shifted beneath his feet, and he was the last one to feel it. You're not the boy I raised, he said quietly.
No, I replia.
I'm not. I stood, tucked the folder under my arm, and gave the room a polite nod. Thank you for your time. As I walked to the door, no one stopped me. No one argued. The balance had shifted, and they all knew it. The door clicked shut behind me, and I paused for just a second in the hallway, letting the echo settle. Maybe Edward never truly saw me. Maybe he never thought I'd rise past the role he cast me in. But I had. Not through force, not through noise, but through patience, through planning, through power held in silence. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he only ever saw the boy he could control. Not the man who could end his career in one calm afternoon. I didn't announce anything. No press release, no letter to shareholders, no symbolic speeches in the atrium. I walked in the next morning wearing the same gray suit I wore to the board meeting.
No tie.
Just quiet presence. The security guard, Malik, gave me a hesitant nod as I scanned my badge. It worked. "Morning, sir," he said, slower than usual, his eyes narrowing. I nodded back. "Morning." The elevator ride to the 18th floor was silent. My reflection in the brushed steel doors looked sharper somehow, more deliberate. When the doors opened, there was a hush that spread like ripples across the floor. The same faces that had once looked through me now paused, unsure. I didn't stop to make it easier for them. I met with every department head over the next 2 weeks.
No existents. No memos.
Just me, a notepad, and a quiet stare that held long enough to pull truth from silence. Finance first, then product, then legal. I asked questions Edward never bothered with. I listened in a way Isaac was too insecure to manage. "We haven't hit our quarterly targets in 5 cycles. Brennan from sales admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "What do you need that you're not getting?" I asked. He blinked. "Time. Direction. Someone who doesn't change the rules every week." I gave it to him. I gave it to all of them. One department at a time, I undid the fractures. Edward had ruled with intimidation, and Isaac with indecision. I built with presence. Small, consistent actions. I didn't fire half the staff. I promoted from within. I called back a few key people who had left quietly under Edward's regime. They returned without fanfare, just a nod and a handshake. Within a few months, the changes showed up on the spreadsheets. Small profits, but steady ones. Client retention improved. Employee turnover slowed. I knew the board noticed, but I didn't seek their approval. I let the numbers speak. One afternoon, Jerome from finance stopped me in the hallway. "It feels different now," he said. "Like we can breathe." I nodded once. That's the idea. The irony wasn't lost on me. They called it taking back control. But I never raised my voice, never made a show of power. I just walked in, sat down, and worked. I didn't think much about Edward or Isaac. I never reached out. I didn't need to. Still, their names floated back to me occasionally. "Edward's trying to start a consulting firm," Jerome said once during a meeting wrap-up. "He pitched one of our old clients. They didn't bite." "Isaac moved to Portland," another said in passing. "Trying to reset, I think." I didn't feel anything when I heard that. No joy, no gloating, just a simple awareness that consequences ripple out. The same way Edward once humiliated me behind closed doors. He now found doors closed to him. Isaac, always too eager to please, had no foundation to build on once the protection fell away. One night, after a long meeting with legal about a new compliance framework, I stayed late. The office had emptied. The city lights glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. I stood with my hands in my pockets, looking out over the skyline. My reflection was faint in the glass. Different. My eyes were quieter, shoulders straighter. There was something harder in the way I held still. A cold kind of peace. The kind you earn, not chase. I thought about my father. He used to fix broken engines in silence. Not because he couldn't speak, but because the work was louder than words. He always said, "The thing you build with your hands knows you better than the one you build with your voice." I had built this, not by tearing everything down, but by walking back through the smoke and ash they left behind and laying every brick again, one at a time. A few months in, the board sent a formal letter praising the turnaround. They offered to make my role permanent with full authority. I signed it and slid it back across the table. Just keep it simple, I told them. No titles on the door. Just results. They nodded. I never spoke about what happened. Not publicly. Not in interviews. I didn't need to correct the narrative. People eventually saw it for what it was. Edward's name faded from the annual reports. Isaac became a footnote. But I didn't bury them. That would mean I cared enough to keep them close, even in ruin. No, I just stepped past them. Quietly. The only time I even thought of reaching out was when a former intern, Milo, emailed me saying Edward had tried to recruit him. He said he wanted to build something cleaner, Milo wrote. Sounded desperate. I didn't reply. I just archived the message. The nights grew longer. The office lights dimmer. We hit our first year in the green. Small growth. Controlled. Earned.
No expliques. No gimmicks.
Just a company that could stand again without shaking. One night I stood alone in the lobby, staring at the old company logo etched into the marble. I traced the edges with my eyes. I could have rebranded it all. Changed the color, changed the name, rewritten the story. But I didn't, because the victory wasn't about replacing what was. It was about proving I could lead what they left behind. So no, I didn't ruin my uncle. I didn't destroy his name. I simply walked back into the house he tried to burn me out of, and I sat in my rightful seat. And he had no idea I was the majority shareholder. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of betrayal, corporate politics, and unexpected power dynamics. This narrative aims to highlight the complexities of family businesses, the importance of knowing your worth, and the dramatic twists that can unfold when true authority is revealed.